I've spent 40 years in the Texas dirt, living by a simple rule. The more you love, the more you have to lose. I liked the silence of the high plains. It didn't ask about my scars, and it didn't care about the man I used to be. But then Finnley Vance crashed into my world with a silk shirt, a target on his back, and eyes that looked like a summer storm. I should have turned him away. I should have let the dust swallow him whole. But looking at him, I realized the silence was just another name for being dead. They're coming for him tonight, but to get him, they're going to have to walk through me first.
The sun in West Texas doesn't just shine, it judges. It beats down on the red dirt of the Rawlins Ranch until everything, the cattle, the fences, and the souls of the men who tend them, are baked into something hard, brittle, and unforgiving. I've lived under that sun for 40 years, and in all that time, I never once asked it for mercy. My name is Cade Rawlins. I'm a man of few words and even fewer friends. My face is a map of every hard winter and every bad decision I've ever made, etched in lines around my eyes and a scar that runs jagged across my shoulder, a souvenir from a war I tried to leave behind in the sands of a different desert. I liked the silence of the high plains. The silence didn't ask about the people I couldn't save, and it certainly didn't ask why a man with my inheritance chose to live in a cedar post shack with nothing but a Winchester rifle and a sense of duty. But the universe has a way of laughing at a man's plans for peace. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day where the heat shimmered off the road in oily waves, making the horizon dance like a fever dream. I was out near the northern boundary, mending a stretch of wire that a stubborn bull had decided to challenge, when I saw it, a flash of silver out of place against the dull browns and reds of the scrub brush. As I rode closer on my mare, Cigarette, I realized it was a car, a sleek, low-slung European thing that had no business being within 50 miles of a dirt track. It was nose-deep in a dry creek bed. The tires spun raw into the silt. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the trunk, clutching a designer leather bag like it was a life preserver. He wore a white silk shirt that was now stained with sweat and grease, and trousers that probably cost more than my 3 first trucks combined. He looked like a fallen angel who had taken a wrong turn and landed in the middle of nowhere. "You lost, son?" I called out. My voice sounded like gravel hitting a tin roof, unused to anything but the low whistles I gave the dogs.
He jumped, his head snapping up. His hair was the color of wheat just before harvest, messy and windswept, but it was his eyes that stopped my heart for a beat. They were blue, not the dull blue of the sky, but the piercing, electric blue of a lightning strike. "I'm not lost," he wheezed, wiping a smudge of dirt across a forehead that looked far too pale for this climate. "I'm just elsewhere, and my elsewhere appears to have a flat tire and a dead engine." "Elsewhere is a dangerous place to be without a gallon of water and a spare," I said, dismounting. I walked toward the car, my spurs jingling a rhythmic warning. Up close, I could see the tremor in his hands. He wasn't just hot, he was terrified. He kept glancing back toward the main road, his shoulders hunched, as if expecting a bullet to find him at any second. "Name's Cade," I said, reaching out a hand. He hesitated, looking at my callous, dirt-stained palm before slowly placing his own in mine. His skin was soft, city soft, but his grip was desperate. "Finnley Vance, but please, just Finn." I hauled him and his bag onto the back of Cigarette. He felt light, almost fragile against my back, his breath hitching every time the horse took a step. I told myself I'd just take him back to the house, let him use the landline and call him a tow. I told myself he'd be gone by sunset. I was a fool. The first week was a slow-motion collision of two worlds. Finn didn't know a bridle from a bucket. He was loud, he hummed pop songs while I was trying to listen to the wind, and he had a habit of wandering into the barn while I was mid-chore. "What are you doing now, Big Tex?" he asked one afternoon, leaning against the stable door. "I'm oiling tack," I grunted, not looking up. "It's work, Finn, something you ought to try." "I work," he countered, a spark of fire in those blue eyes. He pulled a small charcoal pad from his pocket. "I'm an artist. I capture the world before it disappears, like you." I paused, the rag in my hand hovering over the leather. "I ain't disappearing." "No?" Finn stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne still clinging to him, mixing with the smell of my hay and horses. "You've spent 10 years trying to turn yourself into a statue, Cade. You don't talk, you don't laugh, and you look at the horizon like you're waiting for an army to march over it. I'm just trying to draw the man before he turns completely to stone." I should have snapped at him. I should have told him to pack his bags and walk to the station. But I looked at the drawing. It wasn't just a sketch. It was me. He'd caught the sadness I tried to hide in the set of my jaw, the loneliness I wore like a cloak. "Go wash up for dinner," I muttered, my chest feeling tight, and stop looking at me. But he didn't stop. As the days turned into a second week, the tension between us began to change shape. It wasn't just the annoyance of a city boy in a country world anymore. It was the way the air felt thick when we shared a meal under the dim yellow light of the kitchen. It was the way he'd linger a second too long when he handed me a cup of coffee, his fingers brushing mine. I found myself watching him, too. I watched the way he began to love the ranch, how he'd sit on the porch at dawn just to watch the sky turn from violet to gold. I watched the way he talked to my horse, his voice soft and melodic, until even the most stubborn animal in the world was eating out of his hand. He was sunshine, and I was the shadow, and for the first time in my life, I started to wonder what would happen if the shadow let the light in. One night, a summer storm rolled in, not the rain we needed, but a dry lightning show that set the sky on fire. Finn was terrified of the thunder. He came into the living room where I was sitting by the cold fireplace, his face pale in the flashes of purple light. "Can't sleep?" I asked, my voice low. "I hate the noise," he whispered, sitting on the floor near my boots. "In the city, there's always noise, but it's human noise. Out here, it sounds like the world is being torn apart." I reached out, my hand finally settling on his shoulder. "The world's been torn apart before, Finn. It always puts itself back together." He looked up at me then, his eyes wide and searching. "Is that what happened to you? Did you put yourself back together?" I sighed, the weight of the war and the years of solitude pressing down on me. I think I just glued the pieces in the wrong places. Finn reached up, his hand settling on my knee. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure heat that made my breath catch. "I think you did a pretty good job, Cade Rawlins." He leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his pupils. I knew I should pull away. I knew that a man like me had no business with a boy like him, but the silence of the ranch was suddenly too much to bear. I leaned down, my hand cupping his jaw. When I kissed him, it wasn't the soft, gentle thing I expected. It was a hunger. It was 10 years of loneliness crashing against a lifetime of running. He tasted like the wild sage in the coming rain, and he clung to me like I was the only solid thing in a shifting world. But as I pulled him into my lap, the lightning flashed outside, illuminating the driveway. My heart went cold. In the brief glare, I saw them. 2 sets of headlights, high-powered and cold, turning off the main road and onto my track, black SUVs. Finn felt me stiffen. He pulled back, his eyes darting to the window. The color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost again. "They're here," he whispered. "Oh God, Kate, I brought them to your door." I stood up, the heat of the moment replaced by a freezing, lethal clarity.
I walked to the wall and took down my Winchester. "Who's here, Finn?" I asked, my voice dropping into that low register. "The people who killed my father," he said, tears welling in his eyes, "and they don't leave witnesses." I looked at the boy I had just kissed, the boy who had brought art back into my dead world, and I felt a rage so pure it burned. "Get in the cellar," I said, "and don't come out until I tell you." The headlights of the SUVs cut through the swirling Texas dust like the eyes of twin predators. I stood on the porch of the Rawlins Ranch, the old wood groaning under my boots, feeling the familiar cold weight of the Winchester in my grip. It was a weight I had promised the heavens I'd never carry again. But as the engines died and the silence of the desert rushed back in, I realized some ghosts don't stay buried. They just wait for you to find something worth protecting. The doors of the lead vehicle creaked open. 3 men stepped out. They weren't cowboys. They were shadows in Italian suits, their polished shoes looking absurd in the red dirt. The man in the center was older, his hair a silver mane, his face as hard as a diamond. He didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a board member, which made him 10 times more dangerous. "Mr. Rawlins, I presume," the silver-haired man called out. His voice was cultured, echoing with the arrogance of the city. "We've come for the property you're harboring. It belongs to the Vance estate." "On this land, the only property I see is the dirt under your feet," I shouted back, my voice steady as a heartbeat, "and you're trespassing on it." "Cade, please." Finn's voice came from the shadows of the doorway behind me. He hadn't stayed in the cellar. He was trembling, his hands clutching the doorframe, but he had stepped out. He looked at the silver-haired man with a mixture of hatred and pure, unadulterated fear. "Uncle Elias, just leave him out of this. I'll go with you. Just don't hurt him." "Cade, get back inside," I growled, not taking my eyes off the men. "The boy is coming with us, Rawlins," Elias said, his hand moving toward the inside of his jacket. "He's a liability. He saw things during the merger that weren't meant for his eyes. We can do this the easy way, or we can let the buzzards have a feast tonight." The moment Elias's fingers touched leather, I didn't think, I reacted. I didn't fire at him. I wasn't a murderer, but I sent a round into the engine block of the lead SUV. The crack of the Winchester shattered the night, followed by the hiss of steam and the smell of ozone. "The next one goes between your eyes," I said, the Enceladus grit in my voice turning lethal. "Finnley stays. You leave. Now." For a heartbeat, the world hung in the balance. Then Elias signaled his men with a cold, sharp nod. "Burn it," he whispered. I didn't understand what he meant until I saw the flash in the hand of the man on the right. A flare. He tossed it onto the roof of the barn. The dry, sun-baked cedar caught like parchment. Within seconds, the structure where I had spent half my life was a towering inferno. The screams of the horses inside, my horses, tore through me like a physical blade. "No!" Finn screamed, rushing toward the steps. "Finn, stay back!" I tackled him to the dirt just as a hail of gunfire erupted from the second SUV. Bullets chewed into the porch, sending splinters of wood flying like shrapnel. I had to make a choice. If I stayed and fought, we'd both die in the crossfire. If I tried to save the horses, they'd kill Finn while my back was turned. My heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. "The cellar!" I yelled over the roar of the flames. "There's an old tunnel that leads to the creek bed. Go, Finn, run!" "I'm not leaving you," he sobbed, his face smeared with soot and tears. "You're the only reason I'm fighting, son. Go!" I shoved him toward the hatch in the floor and turned back to the yard, emptying the Winchester to keep the suits pinned behind their car doors. I watched the barn collapse in a shower of sparks, the horses breaking through the back fence and disappearing into the dark of the range. A small mercy. But the fire was spreading to the house now. The heat was becoming a living thing, clawing at my skin, melting the wax on the floorboards. I waited until I heard the muffled thud of the cellar door closing. Then I grabbed a spare box of shells and dove over the side of the porch into the darkness of the crawl space.
The tunnel was narrow, smelling of damp earth and spiders, a relic from the Prohibition days. I crawled through the dark, the sound of the house collapsing above me echoing like a funeral drum. Every breath was a struggle against the smoke. I felt the heat of the fire through the earth, a reminder that my past was being incinerated along with my future. I emerged 100 yards away in the dry wash of the creek where I had first found Finn. He was there, huddled against the bank, looking small and broken. When he saw me, he let out a choked cry and threw his arms round my neck, shaking so hard I thought he'd shatter. "I thought you were dead," he whispered into my shoulder. "I thought I lost you." "Takes more than a few city boys to kill a Rawlins," I said, though my hands were shaking. I looked back at the hill. My home was a glowing ember against the black sky. I had nothing left. No ranch, no cattle, just the clothes on my back, a half-empty box of shells, and the boy in my arms. "They won't stop, Cade," Finn said, his voice regaining a jagged edge of resolve. "They have trackers. They have money. They'll hunt us until we're dead or I'm silenced." I looked at him, the firelight reflecting in his electric blue eyes. He wasn't the fragile city boy anymore. The terror had burned away, leaving something hard and bright underneath. "And we stop running," I said. "We can't fight 'em here. We need to get to the border. I have an old friend in El Paso, a man who owes me his life from the days when I wore a uniform. He can get us across, get you the protection you need to tell your story to the right people." "And you?" asked Finn, his hand reaching out to touch the fresh burn on my arm. "What happens to you?" I looked at the horizon, where the first hint of a gray dawn was beginning to bleed into the sky. "I lost my land tonight, Finn, but I realized something while that barn was burning. The land is just dirt. You can buy more dirt, but I only get one of you." I leaned down and kissed him, a hard, desperate promise in the middle of the wreckage. "We're going to El Paso, and if your uncle wants to follow us, he'd better bring a bigger army." We didn't have a car, we didn't have supplies, but as we started walking south through the brush, the sun began to rise over the Texas plains. It was the same sun that had judged me for 40 years, but today, for the first time, it felt like it was lighting the way.
The road to El Paso was paved with ghosts and grit. We moved like shadows through the brush, sticking to the jagged arroyos and the deep violet silhouettes of the mountains. We hiked until my boots were filled with blood, and Finn's breath came in ragged, shallow bursts, but he never once asked to stop. The boy who had arrived in a silk shirt was gone. In his place was a man forged in the fire of the Rawlins Ranch. By the time the lights of the border city flickered on the horizon, we were ghosts ourselves, covered in the gray dust of the desert, our eyes hollow from lack of sleep. But the closer we got, the tighter Finn held my hand. It wasn't a grip of fear anymore. It was an anchor. "Cade," he whispered as we crested the final ridge overlooking the Rio Grande. The river looked like a silver ribbon under the heavy Texas moon. "If we make it across, if we survive this, what are we?" I stopped and looked at him. The moonlight caught the silver of his hair and the bruise on his jaw that was finally fading. I pulled him close. the smell of wood smoke and sweat between us feeling like the most honest thing I'd ever known. "We're whatever we want to be, Finn," I said, my voice thick with the Enceladus gravel. "I don't have a throne to give you. I don't even have a porch to sit on. Just a name and a promise." "That's more than I ever had in London," he replied, leaning his forehead against mine. We met my old contact, Miller, in a hushed corner of a shipping yard. He looked at my tattered clothes and the rifle slung over my shoulder and didn't ask a single question. He just handed me the keys to a battered flatbed truck and a folder of documents. "The bridge is watched, Cade," Miller warned. "Elias Vance has friends in high places. He's moved from recovery to elimination. If you try to cross the main line, you're walking into a slaughterhouse." "Then we don't use the bridge," I said, looking at the dark, rushing water of the river. We drove the truck 3 miles south, where the fence was nothing but rusted wire and the river ran deep and fast. We were halfway to the water's edge when the world suddenly turned white. "Out of the vehicle, now!" a voice boomed over a megaphone. It wasn't the law. It was Elias. He had bypassed the authorities entirely, using his billions to buy the very ground we stood on. 3 black SUVs crested the rise, pinning us in their high beams.
I pushed Finn down onto the floorboards. "Stay low. When I say run, you head for the water. Don't look back. There's a man in Juarez named Ortiz. He's waiting for the folder. You give it to him, and the world finds out what the Vance family did to your father." "I'm not leaving without you, Cade," Finn screamed over the roar of the engines. "This is the only way, Finn. They want the witness. If I stay behind, I'm the distraction. You're the truth." I kicked the door open and rolled into the dirt, the Winchester barking before my knees even hit the ground. I wasn't aiming to kill. I was aiming for tires, for spotlights, for anything to create a pocket of chaos. The air turned into a storm of lead. I felt a searing heat in my thigh, then another in my side, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. "Run, Finn! Run!" I watched him. I watched the boy I loved sprint through the tall grass, the leather bag clutched to his chest. He reached the bank of the Rio Grande just as Elias stepped from his car, a pistol leveled at Finn's back. "No!" I roared. I didn't think about the pain. I didn't think about the blood soaking my shirt. I lunged forward, tackling Elias into the mud just as his gun went off. The bullet went wide, hissing into the water. We tumbled down the embankment, a mess of expensive wool and rugged denim, landing in the freezing current of the river. Elias was older, but he was desperate. He clawed at my eyes, his fingers digging into the scars on my shoulders. "He is my legacy," Elias hissed, his face contorted in the moonlight. "I won't let a stray dog like you ruin 60 years of power." "He's not your legacy," I gasped, slamming my fist into his jaw. "He's a man, and he's free." I held Elias down in the water, the weight of my past and his greed crashing together. But then a hand grabbed my collar, a strong, frantic hand. "Cade, let him go! We have to go!" It was Finn. He hadn't run. He had come back into the water for me. "Finn, get out of here! Not without you!" he screamed. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, real sirens this time. The border patrol was descending on the chaos. Elias's men, seeing the flashing lights of the law, began to scatter into the night like rats.
I looked at Elias, who was shivering and coughing in the silt, his power evaporating with every siren blast. I let him go. He wasn't worth the soul I had left. Finn hauled me toward the Mexican side of the bank, his small frame straining under my weight. We collapsed onto the sand as the American side of the river swarmed with agents. We were wet, we were bleeding, and we were across. 2 months later, the world changed. The documents Finn carried hit the front pages of every major paper. Elias Vance was arrested in a penthouse he would never see again. The Vance empire crumbled, but from the ashes, a new story began. We didn't go back to the ranch. There was nothing left but ash. Instead, we moved further south to a small coastal town where the sun was warm and the air didn't taste like dust. I stood on the deck of our small white cottage, watching the waves roll in. My legs still ached when it rained, and the scars would never fade. But for the first time in 40 years, the silence didn't feel lonely. I felt arms wrap around my waist from behind. Finn pressed his face into my back, the smell of salt and citrus following him. "What are you thinking about, Big Tex?" he asked softly. I turned around, catching his face in my hands. He looked healthy. He looked happy. He was holding a new sketchbook, one filled not with shadows, but with light. "I was thinking about the ranch," I admitted. Finn's smile faltered for a second. "Do you miss it?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and kissed the tip of his nose. I missed the horses, but I realized I didn't need 1,000 acres to be a man. I just needed a reason to stand my ground. I pulled him into a kiss, a long, slow surrender that tasted of peace. The Rawlins name was no longer a warning, it was a promise. And as the sun set over the Pacific, I knew that the drifter had finally found his home, and the cowboy had finally found his soul.
The ranch is gone, and the life I knew is ash. But as I watch Finn sketch the horizon, I realized I didn't lose everything. I finally found the only thing worth keeping. If you believe that some fires are meant to burn so that something better can grow from the wreckage, then you belong here with us. Become a part of the Gay Stories Chronicles by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. We're building a library of stories for the brave, the broken, and the bold, and I'd be honored to have you in the saddle for the next one. Until the next sunset, stay strong.